Thank you, Jan. Before I get started, I'd like to welcome my old friend and colleague, Ingeniero Raul Gonzalez, who is the president of ASPO Mexico, and we're certainly glad to not only see him here, but see Mexico represented at our conference. Welcome, Raul. Well, it is interesting how you take at least two geologists and they always see something different and come to different conclusions. And as Jan said, I don't have any theological or philosophical issues with either of the two presentations that preceded mine. And perhaps a little bit unlike them, I don't do forecasts. What I'm going to do is describe the current state, what's going on right now, what the big plays, and I'm really just going to focus on the Bakken because I don't have time to talk about more, but it's representative. What does it cost to maintain this production? How many wells do you have to drill, and what kind of returns are people getting? So those are my issues, and I guess the comment that companies wouldn't be drilling these wells if they weren't making money, I profoundly disagree with that comment. All we need to do is look back to 2007, 2008, AIG, Merrill Lynch, Lehman Brothers. These guys were so smart that, I mean, they wouldn't be doing this if they weren't making money, and now they don't exist. So oil companies do weird things. Capital is provided to them, and they will spend it. They're really good at it. Making money, public companies, you know, they can get more money. They don't have to make money. So there's a phenomenon that I call shale magical thinking. And magical thinking is fun, maybe even rewarding, because it allows you to, through confirmation bias, you know, I tell Tad something that I tell him that Raul told me, and you know, he goes and tells Jan something, and the same thing, and Jan tells Bob, and eventually it comes back to me, and since we all said the same thing, we must agree, and it must be right. Unfortunately, and I'm not implying that the two previous speakers didn't do this, I like to go to the source. I like to look at, well, okay, that's what you say, but you know, let's see if you're right. And since my first degree was not in geology, I have a quote here from Samuel Johnson. And basically what Samuel Johnson says is that there are two things going on. There's expectation and then there's experience. And while expectation is interesting, experience probably allows you to be disappointed less often. So let's experience the shale phenomenon. What few people realize is that while oil production has increased in the United States, we're not going to become energy independent. Okay, now, I guess that's an opinion, but it's an opinion based on the observations that I will show you. I'd love to be wrong, okay? I mean, I'm not pessimistic. I'm not trying to, I mean, I'm happy that we're producing more oil than we were a few years ago. Reserves and resources are not the same thing. They both start with RES. I really don't care too much about resources, and I really don't care too much about reserves. What I care about is supply, because that's what's available to us. And supply is the problem with tight oil or shale oil, that to maintain supply, you've got to drill so many wells that it'll just make your head spin. We've acknowledged that shale oil wells have high decline rates, higher in many cases than shale gas wells, and they require substantial capital expenditures just to keep production flat, much less increasing. And I acknowledge, I'm happy to say that I think that oil production from the Eagle Ford and Bakken shales will probably increase U.S. supply by a couple of million barrels a day by 2020, depending on price, and that's a real important depending on, okay? I don't see any possible way that there's enough capital in the world that we can have the Bakken continue to produce at levels close to what it is now, out 10 years, 15 years. Plus, I don't think that the nature of the beast is that way. The fields are being discovered, and the fields in the Bakken keep getting smaller. It's just like any other oil play, except it has a lousy reservoir. The good news propaganda campaign about oil, we'll talk about it in the panel. It's weird, you know, but it is propaganda. Our friend Ed Morse says, "Move over OPEC, here we come." Bloomberg, just reporting on what they hear from others. America's gaining energy independence with U.S. as top producer. You know, it's a good thing Romney lost, because he was going to make us energy independent in, I think, 4 years. Gingrich was going to do it. He was not only going to do it in a year, but he was going to find 6 crude oil bays and fully develop them so that we could not only be energy independent, but export all the oil to Europe that Iran was not going to be supplying. And of course, our friends at the IEA have just come out with their World Energy Outlook, and I think it's unfortunate that they stressed the U.S. as the world's biggest oil producer, because most of the rest of the report is really right on. And the key for us to take out of it is that our use of oil in the world is absolutely unsustainable. Okay, so I agree with Fatih Birol on that. I just think it's, you know, they all fall into the same trap. So resources, reserves, and supply. The big ellipse is resources. The smaller ellipse within that are technically recoverable resources. Neither of those two categories have anything to do with profitability. Okay? You get closer to the center, now we're talking about probable resources, all right? Those are still don't have anything to do with profitability. That just means enough wells have been drilled that we know the resource actually exists. They're not speculative. The little white egg, that's reserves. That's the proportion of that huge resource that you can actually make money on, or at least break even. And then the little bitty yellow ellipse is supply. That's actually the portion of those reserves that you've been able to produce. So reserves are a very small set of resources. Reserves take years of development drilling to become supply. Improved undeveloped reserves, as they're allowed in the United States, may never proved undeveloped. Well, it may never be developed because they're based on decline curve analysis that I think we can show is at least questionable. Well, this is the resource pyramid. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. What it says is that you find the easy stuff first, and as you go down the pyramid, the resource size gets bigger and bigger. So I don't see why anybody's surprised that the shale plays have enormous resources. As you go down the pyramid, though, it gets more expensive, more difficult to extract, and you rely more on technology. Now, these shale plays didn't come into being because some bright geologist woke up in the morning and said, "Wow, I've got a really cool idea for a new play." No, they came into being because the better plays were exhausted. We're done. We're down in the lower third of the resource pyramid. We're drilling the crap. That's what's really going on here. The technological revolution that we hear about from time to time, well, that was a quiet revolution. Shale reservoirs are not going to perform as well as conventional reservoirs. Economics depend on high oil prices, and the drilling treadmill never ends because of decline rates. So let's take a look. Bob showed us something like this. This is the truth of supply and disposition of crude oil in the United States. Only the lower band is actually crude oil. All the rest is something else. Some of it's not even petroleum. And I guess the point is, you know, you look over there on the right, and that's our fantastic shale revolution. And we can see that on the left, Prudhoe Bay, which was a big deal, you know, 15 billion barrels probably. It's produced almost 13, and all it did was slow the decline. So that's why I'm a little bit skeptical about how we're going to be independent. Well, here's the story here. We've got you got U.S. crude production below and our consumption above, and even with the shale gas, production's now flat at 6.3 million a day, and we got a 9 million barrel gap. Now, 9 million is kind of an interesting number because that's pretty close to what the U.S. produced at peak. So that's saying that in addition to what we've got to recreate peak oil production in order to be self-sufficient. I don't buy it. Here's the Bakken Shale. There's a lot of wells drilling. It's second only to the Eagle Ford. This is its total production. It's making something like 575,000 barrels of oil a day from about 5,000 wells. You know, you do the math on that, and the average well is about 118 barrels. Whoop-de-doo. Costs about 10 or 11 million, depending on who you believe. And what we're seeing is that, at least in recent months, the production is maybe turning around. I don't know. Maybe it's just not being reported right. But we keep bringing more and more wells on, and the production isn't going up. Well, this is an exercise I like to do. It's called a base decline. This is not a decline curve. All this says is that if you stop adding wells a year ago, look at how the 2,600 wells that are on production behave. And in the case of the Bakken, they decline at 38% a year. Now compare this to a conventional oil field that declines at maybe 4 or 5% a year. This is absolutely breathtaking. This means that the Bakken has to replace 182,000 barrels of oil per day each year just to keep production flat. And that equates to almost 1,500 new wells a year at a cost of a mere $17 billion. We've only added 1,130 new producing wells in the last 12 months. Maybe that's why it looks like it's turning around. So what does it take? Well, the first 182,000 barrels a day took 1,636 wells. The second took 1,480, and the third took 1,488. So we got a little more efficient, and now we're kind of plateauing, and I think that's because we've found most of it. This is a really interesting graph. This is what I call vintage Bakken production. What I've done is said, let's take all the wells that began production in 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, and see what percentage of current production, that is first half of 2012, they're contributing to. And what you see here is that 43% of current production comes from wells that were drilled last year. And 25% of current Bakken production comes from wells that were drilled yesterday. So 90% of Bakken production comes from wells that began producing in the last 30 months. Now, if this is reason for a party, I guess I'll go to bed. That's not very encouraging to me. This is Bakken production. You can see their fields, okay? There's Partial, there's Alger. I mean, this is not a factory. You know, this is not a well you can keep coming back to and just drill more wells and make more money. These are fields, just like in any other play. The green areas are where people are going to make some money. I don't dispute that there's money being made in this or the Eagle Ford play. But it does show that production is from discrete fields. So in closing, shale oil obeys the laws of physics. The Bakken is not a field. The Bakken is a play. You know, the Wilcox was a play. There are fields within plays, and the whole thing is not equally good, and the whole thing can't continue to produce. So commercial oil is found in fields. Plays are not fields. Shale plays depend on constant drilling, and the most current production is from wells drilled yesterday. Decline rates are breathtaking. Shale oil requires infinite capital at a low cost of capital. So if either there's less capital available or you have to pay more to get it, then this whole thing goes south. Therefore, I think it's unlikely that oil from shale plays will result in energy independence. I think the problem with a lot of people's analyses is that we don't pay a lot of attention to three very important things: cost, price, and returns. And while it is true that companies will drill without making money for a while, they can't do it forever because the capital providers eventually say, wait a minute, this is not a good deal. So thank you very much for your attention.